Good evening. Welcome to Wednesday night Bible study. Last week and this week we're studying on science in the Bible. Last week we covered a couple of reasons why we should study science in the Bible, and the fact that the Bible is not against science, but they are against some of the things that scientists claim because they aren't really science. So today we are picking up with page 4. We are down towards the bottom. Last week we finished by pointing out that in Genesis 4 verses 20 through 22, just 7 generations following the creation, that there was many things that had already been developed. Complex musical instruments, farming methods, livestock methods, smelting iron, as well as using other metals. This week we will be going on from there, and we will start out by talking a little bit about the flood and Noah's Ark. As we look down at the bottom of that page, we read, we can also take note of the ark that Noah built. It had to be a sturdy ship to go through all that it went through in the worldwide flood. Note that the ships built in the time period right after the flood, some 4,000 years ago, were far superior in quality than they were in the 14th and 15th centuries A.D. As we turn to the scriptures, I'd like us to consider Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 and 12. Would somebody read that?
In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights.
Most times when people think about the flood, they just think about the 40 days of rain. They don't think about the fact of what came up from underneath. You see, the great deep was broken up and the windows of heaven were open. And when the great deep was broken up and things like geysers and with the geysers you would also have volcanoes. And this would create quite a bit of rough seas for the ark. And it would require that the ark would be a sturdy ship. And it seems that the ships right after the flood seemed like they must have had a similar configuration to the ark, only they were smaller. And not only that, but when you look at that volcanic activity and that water coming from the fountains of the fountains of the deep are hot. When you have geysers and the pools and stuff like that from underneath the earth, they are very hot. And those geysers and those volcanoes would heat the ocean waters, and they would increase the temperature of our oceans significantly. At the same time that was happening, volcanic ash from like a volcano the size of Mount St. Helens cools the Earth's atmosphere about 1.5 degrees. Now, you take volcanoes all over the world like that, and what you get is a situation where it's going to cause a major ice age, because the warm ocean water would cause more evaporation and more precipitation, and then all that volcanic ash around the world would cause cold temperatures, and that would cause lots of snow over a period of quite a few years. And this is how the Great Ice Age happened. It's the only thing really in the history of the world that would cause a super ice age. Since then, there has been other smaller ice ages where the ice came forward some. But actually, since that time, slowly, the ice has been melting. At one time, the glaciers came all the way down into the United States, and there were quite a few glaciers in the northern part of the United States. Canada was pretty much just all glacier, and northern Europe was glacier. But over the centuries, that has slowly receded. And as we consider the universe and how it came into being scientifically, one of the things that we consider is whether things are going forward or whether things are going backwards. We would think that if man developed from animals, that men would become more and more primitive as we go back in history. If evolution were true, we would expect that. And we find that this just isn't the case. And it seems sometimes that scientists try to hide that fact. Following the flood of Noah, and his sons were told that the people were told to scatter and fill the whole earth. As we know, they didn't do that. They decided that they wanted to build a great city, which is why in Babel, in Genesis chapter 11, the Lord confounded their languages and made it so that they could not understand each other. This helps us to understand something. They started to go build this technologically advanced city in one place in the world. But about 1800 years before Christ, all of a sudden, technologically advanced societies popped up all over the world. And they wonder why. And that's because God made them go to different places.
So you think that's like how the pyramids came about and...
Well, we talk about the pyramids. In school, everybody talked about the Egyptian pyramids, right? But there were pyramids in the Middle East. There were pyramids in Egypt. There were pyramids in Central America. There were pyramids in South America. There's pyramids in the Far East that they've discovered since then. The same type of pyramids, those great buildings, are found all over the world. And they weren't made very easily. They give you a picture in the school books of these guys with about 1,000 men around it carrying them, these big blocks. Really, that isn't a reasonable picture of how those things were built. One interesting thing about the pyramids is the pyramid building age lasted several hundred years. But the interesting thing about it is the best pyramids were built first, and the most crude ones are the newest ones. Technology seemed to go backwards during that period. And scattering from Babylon, the societies were, and like I said, they built them, the pyramids in Egypt and many other places. The Minoan civilization also prospered further to the west. Now, it's kind of interesting that in this primitive age that the Minoan civilization used analog type computing devices on their ships. Now, I don't know about you, I thought computers were something in the last 100 or so years, but we have found that they had computers 1700 BC. Which was amazing to me. A lot of these things at one time were claimed to be just myths. But the problem is, in the last half a century or so, they started to find archaeological evidence to prove that these things existed at that time. That's also the era that Stonehenge was built in England, but not only Stonehenge in England, but there's another Stonehenge too that has later come to be seen. It had been underwater for quite a while, and they didn't know about it. And now there's two Stonehenges. There are old structures, like I said, in the mountains of South and Central America. Some of them date to that time. And there's one really interesting thing that I noted here. In Saca-Human, which is in Central America, one of the buildings they have has a building block in it that's approximately the size of a 5-story house. Now, they can't lift it up, they can't measure its weight, of course. They estimate that the block in that building weighs 20,000 tons, or 400,000 pounds. In 1998, the largest machinery in the world could move something about 1/6 that size. But somebody put that block in that wall thousands of years ago.
Yeah, it makes you think, though.
It does make you think.
Sure, it's in Central
Is
America.
man really going forward?
Well, Yeah, I don't wanna get into that whole discussion. I'd like to say a couple things about that, but we're not gonna get into that discussion.
Were they primitive? Like they say they are? Of course, the Mayans, they're one of the ones that had the pyramids. And their calendar started at the time of Genesis creation. Another thing that was interesting about the Minoan civilization, and they were also found in Asia, is they found from the time before Christ, they found batteries. They don't know what they were used for. From quite a while before Christ, they found batteries. A lot of electrical stuff you can't tell a couple of centuries later because it doesn't last for archaeologists. It's too fragile, electrical and electronic stuff. And some of it disappears, but they found that they had batteries in use well before the time of Christ. And you just wonder why. What were they doing with them? They had some kind of use for electricity if they had batteries. Now, as we look at that kind of things, it should make us wonder how the world really came into being. Are they really telling us the truth when they say things just came up from scratch and that people were primitive way back then? Why do they hide these things? Man wasn't primitive back then. They, a couple of the things, in addition to that, they always talk about the Neanderthal man and how primitive he was, and he was bent over, and he had less brain capacity. But he had a bigger skull with a bigger brain than we do. And actually, scientists have reclassified Neanderthal man. It used to be classified as a lower species. Now it's been classified to basically human being. It's I don't remember our classification, but the same classification as us with Neanderthal after it. In other words, he's just another variation of the human race. And the fact is Neanderthal man is just Northern Europeans. They are the descendants, and actually their brain size has slowly gotten smaller.
Well, 23andMe says I'm part Neanderthal, and I'm smart. I'm just saying. Mine can back like I'm 8% Neanderthal.
Yeah, in other words, you're Northern European.
Yeah, I'm northern. I'm really 100% Northern European, but I like to say I'm Neanderthal too. So.
Yeah.
Don't go there, Sandy.
So as we look at science, there's plenty to suggest that the world was not just brought into being by some unguided situation, but that it really was brought into being by a intelligent God. Someone who knew how to make it. And really the way that science has just kind of been static in a lot of ways points to that. I know that sometimes people say, well, there were primitive people in the world back then. People that, lived in caves and lived very simply. This summer I was out to the Navajo reservation. A lot of those people have no indoor plumbing, have no electricity. Somebody 1,000 years from now can say we were primitive because they go out to the Navajo reservation and see how they live. Pat, growing up, when she was a youngster, she didn't have indoor plumbing.
We did have electricity though.
They
We did
didn't
have-
have electricity,
We
right?
did not have central heat though.
Yeah, didn't have central heat and didn't have indoor plumbing. But Solomon had indoor plumbing in his house 1,000 years before Christ.
Well, there's still places. It's been 20 years, but I was to South America, to French Guiana, and we went out into the Amazon jungle, and there were a lot of people out there living in just huts anymore with very rudimentary, not what you think, and I'm sure they're still living out there.
Sure, and it's that way in Haiti.
True, they live in stick and mud houses in Haiti too. It's been
So it's all over the world. Just because some of the people couldn't afford the better life doesn't mean that it didn't exist thousands of years ago. And it's the same way today, of course. And it's not because the people of Haiti or the people of South America or the Navajo Indians are any less intelligent than we are. They're ever been as intelligent as we are. They just don't have what we have. And some societies actually haven't desired fancier and better things. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Navajo are so backwards. They're happy. And when we were in Haiti, they're happy the way they are.
Well, for one thing, and I'll speak from personal experience, they don't know any different. Most of them. I didn't know that people had, till I went to school, I didn't know that there was, indoor plumbing. Because everybody in town did not
Hey, your
have,
parents never told you, right?
everybody in town had outhouses. And everybody took a bath in the middle of the kitchen floor. So, you go to school and you find out these magical things that flush. It was really great. I stood there and flushed it a couple times. But, so if you don't know any better,
As a child, yeah.
and I'm old, but I'm not that old.
Yes, you are.
No, in Romania, when I lived there in 1999, 2000 actually, we lived on a farm where we had the same setup. We had no plumbing. We had electricity though. But we had a outhouse as well. Almost everybody did in this
Yeah.
countryside. But there were some parts of Romania where they had very nice technology.
Right.
In some parts they were just, that's the way it was.
Yeah, so you didn't know any better, so maybe, you know, they moved to the caves, maybe they moved to the caves because it was a way to cheaply
Well-
heat your, a cave is cool in the summer and it would hold the heat.
The amount, actually, the period that Neanderthal lived in caves in northern Europe would be the same period of the Ice Age. And you know what it's like to try to build in northern Alaska, where you have the permafrost that goes down way below the ground. You can't build it. They only have construction so far up in Alaska because of the weather. Because you had nothing solid to build on. And I think that was the situation in Northern Europe at that time. With the Ice Age, it would have made it very difficult for any possibility of building. And we don't think, you know, scientists don't consider things like that. And yes, a lot of the skeletons they found were bent over because the weather they had up there, unless they had very excellent nutrition, they would get the disease rickets, which would cause them to be bent over.
But there's also stuff with the thumb, where certain species we have, there was something with the thumb I remember learning in college about that, in ecology class, where once they found this thing in the thumb, then they knew we're walking now. It was very weird, the thumb or the toe, something like that. And that was the differences. Now I was like, look, now we're walking, now we're not walking like monkeys anymore. There's something in the skeleton that kind of differentiated that, you know? But it's interesting, I never heard of, what was that disease called?
Rickets.
Rickets.
It's a disease, yeah, and it causes you to be
Yeah.
bent over.
Mm.
And so, you can be fully human and be in that situation.
No
Well-
vitamin D or something?
Well, it happens to some older people now,
Yes,
you know?
Is it with
Yeah,
the less
curvature.
vitamin D or
It's
something?
just, it's usually degenerative,
Right, it's that curvature of the spine, you
yeah.
start.
Yeah,
degenerative joint disease,
that's right.
where your spine starts collapsing on itself, and it really has nothing to do with it's just genetic and
Genetic, yeah.
so.
yeah, so, doesn't make a person any less human when he ends up in that situation. And sometimes scientists and what they say isn't necessarily right. And that's the point. They actually have not, in all the time that they've been studying and trying to say we evolved, they have not found evidence of one species evolving to another species. They found different species, but they haven't found
Connection.
Uh-huh.
a connection from one to the other.
Well, if you think about it, if we evolved, they'd still be evolving, you would see them. They just don't evolve and stop.
Yeah,
They keep evolving.
well, even,
So where's these, you know, that's why this evolution's a bunch of bunk.
even with the animals, you don't find, they crossbreed things, but, you just don't find all of a sudden there's something out there that we don't know what it is.
Well, their thing is, it takes a long time. Right, that's how they come around that.
Well, I know what they
It's
say.
like, oh, it's gonna
It
take
would
so many
still be
thousands of
changing.
years that.
You'd find somebody partially changed, well, you're part of whatever you were, now you're trying to be.
Yeah.
You develop
It
an
would
extra
still be
finger or an extra, tail or something,
So,
Yeah, it's a theory, that's their theory, Bass, but they have no proof.
And I know they do that in college, they do
After
a lot of
100
brainwashing.
After hundreds of years, they don't have any proof for it, they teach it
Right.
as if it's fact, but they still don't have any proof for it. And it's against what the scriptures share.
Right, for sure.
And it seems to be against, in a lot of ways, what's out there. Because, I mean, with science highly developed way back and stuff like that, where they say it was primitive and that, it makes you wonder.
Yes.
You know, it's not going the way they say it's going.
well, for many years, they all said the dinosaurs died
Right.
before,
Way before man.
but now they're finding, especially with the worldwide drought that they're having, they're finding dinosaur footprints and man's footprints side by side.
And they found one, was it in yesterday's paper or Sunday? They found a new dinosaur about 24 million years ago.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't know,
it's
that-
not really
it's a
They
24.
say it was 24
million, yeah.
million years ago, but
And
he
the
was
man,
somewhere in the last 6,000 years.
the man that was walking with the dinosaur wound up in his stomach, right?
Well, not all some dinosaurs were vegetarians.
Yeah, they say
Somewhere.
that.
But,
Well,
Not
I'm
old
sure if he was
Rex was.
walking beside him, it wasn't one of the
Not old
vegan.
Rex wasn't.
He had short arms, he'd be hard to catch. I'm sorry.
actually, you found the man with a piece of dinosaur roast in his stomach.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I digress, I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's okay.
Wrong
Well,
choice.
anyway, there's competing theories on how things started. And of course, we as Christians believe and can support with a lot of scientific evidence that creation is how. And of course, people that believe in a God, they don't, for a science class, they don't say, hey, our God exists. They say, here's evidence that somebody that had intelligence
Yeah,
created this.
or higher being or something.
Yeah. You don't build something complex without any knowledge. When you look at the amount of genes and that, the DNA that a person has, you don't just build this for nothing. And it doesn't just happen. There's too much to it. Now, we have science should be used for stewardship of the earth. But I stuck another thing in here. That shouldn't mean that people use scientists to scare people. And first we're going to talk about stewards though.
Well,
What kind of things can we do to be good stewards of the earth?
Don't throw trash in the ocean.
Don't throw trash in the ocean, right? Navy did that back when I was in the Navy. They don't do it anymore. Don't throw trash along the highway. We were on a bus trip last year. We went down, I think it was the Baltimore, Washington Parkway. And the sides of the road looked like trash cans. Because there was trash scattered everywhere. People were terrible. That's not good stewardship of our world.
I also think sun should be used in a way where it can create more food for people that are poor.
It can create more food, yeah.
Yeah, technology wise.
We use science to find new ways to get energy. And I agree that windmills are good and that solar energy's good. I don't agree with government pushing and sponsoring what energy they want used.
Well, if it wasn't for EPA, a lot of bad things would have happened with water pollution. Clean water would have been awful. So there has to be-
Pollution.
Well, yeah, that kinda goes in with good stewardship.
I guess.
Yeah.
Like you're saying government, that's EPA still government.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
still
they do
government.
some good things, but
They do
I
some-
agree
some
with
things
Pastor Joe.
They shouldn't decide which energy and that we use.
to use.
You mean like California saying you only have to use electric cars?
Yeah, especially.
Yeah. 1 week they came out with everybody has to have an electric car by this
2025, I think it was.
And the next week they said, so many hours a day you gotta turn your electricity off because our grid can't handle things.
Yeah.
Huh?
How's that gonna work in the winter?
Yeah, how's that gonna work?
But how are you gonna be able to charge your car to go?
Right.
Right. That's government doing things, so that scares me. And I think sometimes government scares people to gain power. And I'm afraid our government does that does it sometimes with energy. I really don't think the battery cars are the solution. The batteries cause a lot of pollution
Yeah, we're gonna get rid of those.
in our society.
And they're very, very expensive.
Yeah.
They only store power, they don't make it.
Mhm.
I mean, battery cars aren't zero emissions because the electric that you put in them was from emissions, and then they turn around and have the batteries. They're another problem, so government does stuff like that. Government is very inefficient in most cases. And there are some things, yeah, EPA, we need clean water. Yes. And like you said, there are some good things, but when they try to control too much and the government tries to scare us. Now, one of the things they try to scare us with is global warming. Right? Our Earth is gonna be destroyed. Global warming. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 8, verse 21 and 22. Would somebody read that for me?
What was that, Genesis?
8 verses 21 and 22.
And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.
Okay, you hear what it says in the second verse there? As long as the earth endures, there's gonna be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, it will never cease. We have God's word on that.
Like you will never be destroyed, you mean?
By water.
No, as long as the earth exists, we're not gonna make it so that it can't be used. Those things, as long as the earth exists, those things will be. You're gonna have your planting, you're gonna have your cold and hot, you're gonna have your summer and winter, you're gonna have your day and night, none of those things won't cease to be. We have God's promise of that. Well, we have man telling us we're making this place a horrible place, that it's, in 50 years, it's gonna be a mess, destroyed. No, we're not. God says we're not. Now, that's as until the world, as long as the world exists. At the end, God is gonna destroy the world by fire. Then it won't exist anymore. But until that time that he destroys it, these things are gonna go on. And we don't have to be afraid. And the fear that the government's trying to put in us, it's just not true.
But don't you have these greedy corporations that they will go to no length of getting what they need and make their money? That's scary. You see what I'm saying? You have these oil companies that they will destroy everything in their path without fear or repercussion as long as they make their quota.
We have evil men in the world, there's no doubt about that. And,
There's a huge oil spill.
and
Huge oil
there's
spill.
tracts of land.
Well, I think man can mess up the earth. I mean, if they ever get into this nuclear wars, that's the end. I mean, it's gonna be uninhabitable. You know, if we ever go nuclear, had the big nuclear wipe, you know, I think man can interfere. Let's make it uninhabitable, but I think,
God's
Well,
big
I-
enough.
yeah, what I think he's saying, I mean, we have to be good stewards.
Yeah.
And it will last.
He says that we have to be good stewards, but he also makes the promise that
Right.
he's gonna preserve the world. We have a God that's big enough to preserve the world. And that's the bottom line there.
Well, probably just parts of it, well, like say the icebergs, you know, with the polar bears and how they're
Yes.
supposed
Yeah.
to be,
It
melting
doesn't
and-
say anywhere here there will always be icebergs.
yeah, you know, that's just an example.
He
But,
just-
I mean,
Maybe before the ice age, before the flood, there were no icebergs. You know?
And bears they, I hate to say, well, but they changed to meet their conditions.
We do change
Yeah.
some, back and forth.
That's why there's,
There is change within kinds.
There you go. That's a low point. Yeah.
yeah, I was trying to.
What they haven't found is a kind of animal going to another kind. There's change within kinds.
Like dogs, you can have different type of dogs,
Right.
but it's not gonna.
But
be-
they always stay a dog.
Yeah.
You have different variations of human beings. We have, Chinese human beings, we have whites, we have blacks, we
Yeah.
have native types in the,
But we all still bleed red.
but we're all still human beings.
When they say about global warming, because, right now they're talking about there's some big ice shelf in Antarctica that's melting faster than they thought. And within so many years, it's gonna flood New York City and all this. But God promised in Genesis chapter 9 that he said, when he put the rainbow in the sky, he said, and I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall any more be a flood to destroy the earth. But that's what they try to scare us with this, that, you know,
But he didn't say he wouldn't destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he didn't say he wouldn't destroy New York City because it's so evil.
it needs to flood Washington DC, I'm sorry.
You think he should get New York City? I mean Washington DC instead.
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. And, yeah, I know New Orleans is below sea level, right?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of the world that's below sea level. Well, not a lot, but I know Amsterdam, Holland is.
Well, Holland is
Yeah, the
below
whole-
sea level. And they just have a big thing around it to keep the water from rushing in. Of course, Holland was always below sea level. Holland is a man-made area.
Yeah,
It was below sea level. They put in
dikes.
windmills. They put the barriers around and they pumped the water out and made land. That's Holland.
Whoa.
Yeah, Raystown, they flooded the town, made a lake.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
See, so, you know, so man does stuff like that. And there's nothing that says that there won't be global warming. And the globe is warming, and it's been warming generally ever since the Ice Age. At one time, a decent amount of the United States was covered with glaciers. That wasn't in our lifetime, was it?
No.
It was a couple thousand years before our lifetime. But ever since the Ice Age, it's been going back. And that was before cars, and that was before any of these things. And the fact is that sunspots, volcanoes, natural things have more effect on the temperature of the air in the earth than what man does.
Carbon.
And another thing that's true is that global warming is bad for some people and good for others. It turns some places in the deserts and gives it storms. And other places go from being desert to rich and able to produce food. And mankind doesn't understand enough to completely know what the next degree or the next degree or the next degree is going to do. And we can't stop global warming. It doesn't really matter what we do, because it's been doing that for thousands of years.
But can we slow it down?
We could slow it down, but we don't really know if it's beneficial. Because we don't understand how everything works. Only
Yes.
God does.
Somebody said there's so many variables that goes into the global warming prediction that it's almost impossible to predict it.
That's exactly right. There's so many variables. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
One of the problems with our science today is science is not run even by scientists. Science is run by politicians. If you are a scientist in an American university, you need funding. And you have to come up with the results that the politician wants you to come up with. it's like that in most every country. And that makes it really hard to trust scientists. It really does. It's bad enough that and we talked about this last week, it's bad enough that scientists go on the basis of there is no God. That's what's taught by the National Center for Science Education.
I wonder
There is
how
no
the
God.
scientists that do believe in God or
There are
a
scientists
little bit,
that
or that are
believe in
true
God.
Christian, and I wonder how they deal with this, you know?
Well, usually they get lower paying jobs.
Yeah, probably.
Because they leave the government controlled jobs and they have to get employment somewhere else because they're shunned at most of the universities and that, and even kicked out.
I had something there with the flooding. I mean, it is possible we may still have a flood from the ice and everything melting, but it's not like right here. We've got in the scriptures here. It says, "Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life." So that don't mean
Right.
yeah. So we
It's
still have
not
a
saying
flood.
that there's not going
God's
to
not
destroy
doing
New
that.
York City or New Orleans.
Well, God's not flooding that this time. This is a natural occurrence, and
Yeah.
it could flood partially there. It
Well,
says
right.
It isn't going to kill all life.
There's always been there's always been small catastrophes on the
Right.
earth, and there always will be.
You know, you think about these volcanoes, they erupt and,
Yeah.
you know, we're going a few weeks, we're going to Pompeii, you know. That's gonna, you know, that wiped out a whole city. And they can see the whole city now by digging it up because everything stopped. I know you're running out of time.
Yeah, we only have a few minutes. I made this extra page, and I just got done the first line. And stuff like solar energy and windmills, that's good. And I'm not arguing that we shouldn't get other areas of energy and stuff. I think that they're going into hydrogen operated cars now too. And what do you think about the handling of pandemics and health scares? Do you think that was a disaster?
You're gonna need more than a few minutes to discuss that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys would be good to have this.
And
again.
something for
We
you
don't
to
have
think
a-
about. We can't talk about that here. Understand that that's really an issue with science.
Well,
And
I'll just say, the monkeypox.
Yeah,
The big
that's
thing is
another-
now monkeypox. Do you know how many people have died in the United States from monkeypox? One.
Yeah.
And he probably did not die of monkeypox, he probably just had monkeypox when he died.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But one, but they act like it's a big, if you read on how you get it,
I ain't heard much about it.
yeah,
you're not
My
gonna,
doctor's office just lifted the mask. They're not even.
oh, I wish my doctor's office.
OIP lifted masks. They're not even.
yeah,
So that's good. I've been on board with that for a long time now.
right.
But anyway, I'm sorry.
That gets into how a Christian ought to handle fear. And understand that we're not to be afraid.
It's all about control.
Yeah,
It's all about control. That was the bottom line.
yeah.
I mean, I know that COVID was real because I had it.
It was
It
real.
was
It
bad,
was a
but-
disease.
No,
no
I'm not
doubt.
gonna live in fear. I'm gonna do
But
what I want.
sometimes some of the things that they do because of COVID or some other disease hurts people,
Especially the old people.
especially the old people.
Yeah.
Pat's dad gave up the will to live because they basically shut him in a room.
Yeah.
Cause he was in a nursing home.
Well, he was in independent living, and they told him he couldn't leave his apartment, and he just said, if that's what it is, I'm just not gonna live, and he died. He
He
was,
just willed himself to die
Oh.
because they wouldn't let him live. They wouldn't let him socialize with anybody or anything. Those kind of things are destructive.
Look at all the kids that
But they say
have
in
mental
trouble, getting the
illness
population
because-
down one way.
and what were they gonna
went
do?
out to school.
my
Yeah,
dad was 95 years old, he might have died anyway, but what did they, if they could kept him through the whole pandemic, what did they gain him, a year or two?
yeah, and he's 95 years old. You know, they
Yeah.
took a year or two away at that age.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of questions you ask about that, but, and there's one other thing that I mentioned, and I'm just gonna mention that too. There's a problem with pride and knowledge when you do a lot of study of science. Sometimes when people think they know an awful lot about how the world works, it puffs them up. In 1 Corinthians chapter 8, I have this marked, so I'll try to. And this is on a total different subject, but it gives this principle of pride. And that's important. As touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. If any man think he knows anything, he knows nothing as he ought to know. And that's the first two verses of
Yeah,
1
mine
Corinthians
has love
chapter
in
8.
place of, mine has love in place of.
love, right. And that's that sacrificial love. Having too much knowledge of any kind can make you proud. And we need to be careful as we learn science that it doesn't make us proud, that we stay humble. Because there's one thing that's sure, and that's God hates pride. God fights the proud and gives grace to the humble. So we need to be careful about that when we're studying science. And like she said, we can't talk about the pandemic part of it today because we need another hour.
Next week you'll have Pastor Craig.
Next week you get to go back to Revelation.
This is interesting though, very interesting. Keep talking about it, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Joe.
Yeah.
You want to pray before Sandy turns you off?
Yes. Father, we just thank you so much for your love in Christ, and we thank you that you are in control. Father, we thank you that you are in control, that we can trust you. And yes, there will be problems in this world, and yes, we can use science to help make our lives better. But keep us humble and just encourage us and help us to love those around us. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen.